Hi, folks. My name is Dave Farish. I'm your North Texas Conference Associate Conference Lay Leader for Lay Initiatives. On behalf of the annual conference, and particularly your Board of Laity, I'd like to welcome you to District Training 2021, our virtual version of that. This is the training for the Committee on Nominations and Leadership Development. Now, you may have thought, I thought it was the Committee on Nominations, and a long time ago that would have been true. At various times it also was called the Committee on Lay Leadership. But back in 08, it put all that back together again. And so the current name of our committee is the Committee on Nominations and Leadership Development. As you might imagine, that added emphasis at the end, leadership development, is really, really important in the life of our church. And I think a wonderful opportunity for ministry to occur. So I just want to thank you in advance for the work you're going to be doing. I think the Committee on Nominations and Leadership Development may be the most important committee in the life of the church because we equip and encourage the effectiveness of ministry in every other committee that happens in the life of our church. So again, thank you for the work that you're going to be doing this year. Now today what we're going to talk about is a little bit about what your job is and then some strategies on how you might accomplish those things in the coming year. So that said, let's dive into our work. So first is, what's my job on the Committee on Nominations and Leadership Development? Now from now on out, I'm going to refer to it as the CNLD because that's a whole lot easier and quicker to say. So if that's the case, here's some basics about what the CNLD is. So CNLD is chaired by the pastor. It's the only committee in the church that is chaired by the pastor. But there's also a vice chair who is elected by the CNLD, and that person is one of the lay people serving on CNLD. To serve, all you need to be is a professing member of the local church. So here's how the CNLD is organized. So each year, CNLD is elected by the church conference. It can consist of up to 9 members, and then the pastor and the lay leader on top of that. And those 9 are organized in 3 classes in rotating 3-year terms. So every year, a third of the committee would rotate off, and then a third would be new incoming folks every year. On your committee, you should have at least 1 young adult, if that's possible, and 1 or more members of your committee could be youth. Now, if you've ever taken a spiritual gifts inventory, you may notice your spiritual gifts among this list. If you haven't, you might want to go take one and see where you find yourself on this list. Now, not that you would have all of these gifts, but hopefully on your the entirety of your CNLD, these gifts would be present. They are all very helpful in the work you're going to do. In addition to spiritual gifts, there's some skills and abilities that are helpful in the work that you will do as well. The first is past ministry experience. Obviously, a lot of your work is going to be focused on helping the various ministry areas in your church become more effective. So it'd be nice if you had some experience in those areas that would allow you to be most helpful. Second is that you on the committee would always give evidence of growing discipleship. Not that you have arrived already, but help sort of establish and promote this ethic of no matter how much experience we have in leadership and in church organization, that we're always growing as disciples. Third is a willingness, maybe even an eagerness to help others identify their place in ministry in the life of the church. To be really keenly interested in finding not just the ministry of a few, but the ministry of every single person that graces your doors. Along with that is an ability, or at the very least, a desire to mentor people. Mentoring is different than teaching someone how to do the job that you may have done previously. Rather, mentoring is bringing your skills and resources that you have or know of to equip that new ministry leader to maybe even envision and enact ministry in a way that has never been done before. And finally, it's really helpful if you have a passion for lay ministry. If you believe that our churches are only vital when the laity are vital in the work of the church. Not just simply doing what the staff says to do, but rather creating and envisioning and leading in ministry on their own. So if those things are true, then these are the things sort of condensed down to an easy list from the book of discipline language that are your duties and responsibilities. So the book of discipline really starts off by saying that it's important that we biblically and theologically reflect on the mission, the primary task, and the ministries of the local church. That kind of gets us away from the way things we've done it to really envisioning from an ongoing faith way, a living faith way, how it is we might not only continue ministries we've done, but envision new ones as well. And so I encourage you to be in the process of biblically and theologically reflecting both in your meetings as CNLD and in those interim times between meetings as you're thinking about the work of the church. Second is you're tasked with helping the congregation see its own giftedness. Again, that's not just the giftedness of a few, but helping every person who comes into your doors understand that they're not only gifted, but those gifts can be turned around and utilized in a way that gives great purpose to life. To do that, you're probably going to have to develop a system for becoming familiar with the people in your congregation and from being familiar with the ministry needs of your church so you can put those two together and connect those dots. Along with that is once you've connected those dots and found someone that you think feel called to be in ministry, that you give them clear job descriptions and help them understand the ways in which what's required of each of those individual jobs. And finally, once you've done those things, then you continue on an ongoing basis to identify, call, equip, and provide ministry resources and training for those that are serving in the ministry areas inside your church. And finally, and maybe the easiest thing that you'll do is to prepare a nomination report for the charge conference every year. So if that's what we're going to do, then what are some strategies for how we might do these things? So sort of group these into three big areas. The first of which is how is it we identify people? In a lot of ways, this is like being a talent scout. How is it we find people and find giftedness inside our congregation? So the first thing is find a system for knowing your congregation. I'm going to tell you that I could give you tons of strategies about how to do that. But the reality is that with the vast difference in our congregations in the North Texas Conference, both in size and in culture and in ethnicity and language and worship habits, and in some cases, even the way we do ministry, that the solutions that are going to be best for the congregation are ones that you come to that are authentic and genuine in the ways that your congregation does ministry. But to that end, I'm going to give you a couple of ideas of how it is you might get to know your congregation better. And so one is, I sort of alluded to this earlier, but spiritual giftedness is one way to sort of unlock how someone might see themselves differently in terms of ministry versus tasks. And so years ago in our church, I took every ministry role in the life of the church and then index those by the spiritual gifts necessary to do that work, so that when someone took a spiritual gifts inventory, then I could give them a tailored list to them of various commitment levels, of various spiritual maturity levels, and there were ministry roles that fit them. And then from that, I encouraged them to choose one or two of that list. And then I was able to give those, once they made those choices, give their names to those ministry areas who could then put them into work right away. Well, leadership can be done the very same way. Is that you can sometimes spiritual gifts gives you an insight into people who had leadership gifts that you might not have seen before. The second way, I think, is really just creating opportunities. Sometimes you don't know what you see till you see it, and so instead of focusing like we tend to do in the Methodist Church with sort of a committee-based structure of doing things, what if we broke up the ministry of each area into sort of executable tasks, things similar to the way we do Vacation Bible School, which is very finite in length and in responsibility and in purpose. But what if we were able to do that and plug people in for a very small amount of time, but then harvest from those experiences those folks who may be ready to take a next step in leadership from those who are currently leading those ministry areas. What if we created several more spaces and places that people might serve in ways that which would resonate within them? And could we get to know our congregation by doing that? I think the answer may be yes. So once we've identified, then our task is how do we develop and deploy those leaders? So let me just talk in general about some concepts about developing leaders that we found to be true. The first is that gifts and talents or skills are two different things, particularly when we're talking about spiritual gifts. Sometimes there's people who are able to do some work, but maybe they're not gifted spiritually in that way. And one of those examples might be that some churches tend to fill their finance teams only with accounting type people. But maybe it is that among the people who serve on your finance team, it's not just accounting people, but maybe it's people who have gifts with fundraising or with connecting the spiritual component of giving from the idea of people who have a rich sense of stewardship. Maybe you need those folks to provide a more holistic sense of the work that finance might do. That's an example of how you might think of that differently. Second thing is sometimes spiritual gifts give us some insight. And the other thing that is true in that same way is passion. People may have a real driving passion to do some work, but they may not yet have the skills to do it. Turns out that skills and training is fairly easy to do. But trying to take someone who has the skills and to give them passion is a far taller hill to climb. The other thing that's important to do is creating a culture of affirmation. That's not just affirming those and saying thanks to those who have done work, but rather creating a culture in your church which always affirms when they see gifts in people. And that's at every level of ministry. To encourage all of your leaders to affirm when they see giftedness inside the people that they are serving with. Because that may be the catalyst to someone thinking, maybe I can take the next step in leadership. And finally, make sure your leaders, and you can take the lead on this, are always in the business of continuous growth. It's not that because we've done something a certain way or because we've developed this level of knowledge about the work we're doing that we sort of stop and we've arrived, but rather we're always growing and trying to figure out how can we do this in a new way? How can we do this differently? How can we do this more effectively? How can we reach more people? And so you're always modeling an inclination towards growth. So one of the things I recommend is at the very beginning of the year to do a leadership retreat or a training retreat, something like that at the very beginning of the year, to help people that are just taking new ministry roles, or even for those that have been serving in roles, to sort of reacquaint everyone with the expectations of those roles, maybe some things about the way the church is going to approach ministry in the coming year that might be uniquely different from the year prior, and to give some space for envisioning and creating and thinking about how ministry might be done differently in the year ahead. I can't recommend that vehicle enough. And CNLD ideally would host this training. There are also some other resources that you can use not only there, but on an ongoing basis. One is the Discipleship Ministries website, umcdiscipleship.org. And if you go to the Equipping Leaders tab, there is a treasure trove of resources. Some are articles, some are webinars, but all kinds of things that'll be helpful to you. So I encourage you just to sort of wander about that website to look for things that might be helpful to the committees in your church and the ministry areas in your church. And if you find them, pass those on to those teams. Second is our own church website, ntcumc.org. And there are three areas I want to call your attention to. The first is the Center for Leadership Development. Particularly, one of the best resources for SPRCs is on there. It's called the SPRC Toolkit, Staff Parish Relations Committee. And there's an entire toolkit of things that in a very vital way equip the work that the SPRC does. You'll also see things as we're growing out this area over the coming year. You'll see things like this training will be available, as well as all the other training that's going on District Day today. That training will be available on the Center for Leadership Development website. And we're hoping to find what you need and continue to growing that out to give you a resource center there. Same thing is true, let me sort of skip ahead to the end, to the Board of Laity, our webpage. You'll see some of those same connecting links there as well. But there also will be Board of Laity events and other things that, in which we provide some support to you. Some of those is the Christian Educators Fellowship. There's also one for church admin types, church secretaries. And so those connections to those areas on the Board of Laity website. And finally is lay servant ministry. And some of you may have remember when they were called lay speaking ministries. LSM has a very broad catalog. Some of those are in-person classes. Some of those are online classes that provide training resources for a whole variety of ministry areas inside the life of your church. So that is a little deeper commitment in terms of time, but that may be an excellent set of resourcing for some of your leaders in the ministry areas in your church. And so those are some ways to develop leaders. Like I said, I hope over the next year, we're going to continue to build out those resources for you. The deploying side really becomes primarily in the form of the nominations report. And that happens at Charge Conference every year. But during the year, there's also times when leaders either have to step down or you create a new ministry and you need new leaders for that. So the Committee on Nominations and Leadership Development will continue to work with Church Council, and then Church Council approves those leaders in those interim spaces as as the needs arise, excuse me. All right, so then the last phase is sort of the evaluate, monitor thing. And I'm going to tell you this might be one of the best ways you can do ministry, because in this phase or this aspect of our work, we get to see and listen to those ministry areas and figure out what they need that maybe we haven't envisioned yet. And this is a way in which you can be deeply responsive to your ministry areas. One of those ways is assisting the church council. As I alluded to earlier, you're called to assist the church council throughout the year in terms of leadership development. And that may be things like devoting some time at your church council meetings to do some leadership development pieces. Those may be some distributed training you do to pass out sort of as homework for your church council before they get there. Maybe listening sessions to listen to your church council about what they need. But I'm also going to encourage you to be thinking about not only the ministry that's going on inside the organism of the church, but also to look beyond the walls of the church to the ministry opportunities that occur in the mission fields that your churches are resident in. And to always be pushing to find new and unique and effective ways to minister to an ever widening set of people. Second thing you'll do with the monitoring thing is encourage your leaders to also partner with you on that, to always keep your eye out for the next group of leaders that are coming up, and working to identify and prepare those folks so that they're ready to take the baton when it's their time. And finally, help your leaders really live out a culture of servant leadership. And you can do that by vitally being in service to those ministry areas as opposed to being in authority over them. And by always thinking, how can I be helpful to you? What is it you need? What can I do to make your ministry better? And then encouraging them to do the very same for the people that work inside of their ministry areas. And then maybe the last piece is find ways to celebrate the work of the laity, to highlight what's going on in the life of the laity of your church. I think this is a way in which lay service becomes really contagious. And so one of those Sundays is Laity Sunday. There's an opportunity for laity to have a vital role in ministry, but also don't forget things like times when you're making announcements, whether those are in your weekly emails or in worship to allow the lay people in those ministry areas to be highlighted so that people know who to talk to if they want to be a part of that ministry area. One of the things is I visit churches around the annual conference, both in person and as I look at your websites. One of the things I see most notably absent is evidence of who the laity in terms of leadership are inside your church. And so that's another thing I encourage you to do as a CNLD is to, once your leaders are known, to make them visible in whatever way you can, whether that be a dedicated page on your church website or bulletin boards or other visual representations inside the walls of your church. Something that if someone wants to be involved in ministry, they know who they can reach out to and who they can connect with to begin that process of being in ministry. Of course, whatever you do there, you also need to make sure that stays as up to date as possible so that when people ask to be in ministry, that response is timely. All right, so there's a handful of ideas to get you started. Of course, I can't thank you enough for the work you'll be doing on behalf of not only your church, but on behalf of our annual conference to make servant leaders for the mission fields that are our churches. As I said earlier, I think you stand to be one of the most important, most effective, most influencing bodies inside your church. And so for that, I thank you for the work you're going to do. If there's anything we on the Board of Laity or the Center for Leadership Development or Lay Servant Ministries can do to equip you in that work, please reach out to us. We are very much interested in finding ways to be more in relationship with you, to make the ministries in your church more alive, more effective, and more invoking of the kingdom. I thank you again for your time today. Please share this to those you think it might bless, and blessings on the work that you will do in your churches in the name of Jesus Christ.